Hello and welcome to the Run Testers. My name's Nick. In this video I'm going to be comparing the Garmin Epix Pro and the Apple Watch Ultra 2. Now I just ran the London Marathon last weekend using both watches, and indeed I used them for the bulk of my marathon training over the past 4 months or so. One on each wrist throughout that time. Occasionally I'd take one off to review another watch briefly, but in general I've been using these watches for 4 months and then on race day just to really see how they feel long term. I think these are two of my favourite sports watches on the market. I wanted to see what really cropped up in terms of pros and cons to each over the course of a long period of marathon training. Start by running through some of the design differences between the watch. With the Apple Watch Ultra, you've got a 49mm watch. It just comes in one size. The Epix Pro comes in three sizes. There's the smaller 42mm. The standard Epix Pro is 47mm. And the largest model is the Epix Pro 51mm, which is what I tested over the last 4 months, although I have also used the 47mm watch. The Epix Pro is the more expensive watch. The standard model starts at £830 or $900. And the price goes all the way up to £1,100 or dollars for the pricier models, where you get things like sapphire screens and titanium bodies. The Apple Watch is £800 or $800, just one price for the Apple Watch Ultra 2. The cheaper standard models uses steel for the bezel and case and has a Gorilla Glass screen, and then the sapphire titanium models have sapphire crystal screens and titanium bezels and case backs and are a fair bit lighter as a result. I was testing a titanium watch for the Epix Pro. Contrast, the Apple just comes with a titanium bezel and you have a sapphire crystal display. There's no choice between materials or anything like that, and it's actually 95% recycled titanium. With the Epix, you've got an AMOLED touchscreen and the displays range from 1.2 inches to 1.4 inches on the largest model here, and then with the Apple Watch you've got a 1.9 inch Retina OLED display. So both obviously have optical heart rate sensors, and both of them are actually capable of taking an ECG, although with Garmin that's a feature restricted to those in the US at the moment. Another little difference in the design is that the Epix Pro has a flashlight on it, which you do not get obviously with the Apple Watch, although you can put it into a kind of torch mode where it will use the screen to light up your area around you. You have a 5-button design on the Epix Pro, which is Garmin's classic setup. With the Apple Watch Ultra you've got 3 buttons, including the action button and then a digital dial as well to help you navigate the menus. Both watches have multi-band GPS and a high water resistance rating. It's 1080M on the Epix Pro and it's WR100 for the Apple Watch Ultra 2. With the Garmin you can connect external sensors via both ANT Plus and Bluetooth. With the Apple Watch Ultra it's only via Bluetooth, so that's for things like chest straps and cycling power sensors. And then you've got a compass, a barometric altimeter and a pulse oximeter on both. There's going to be a slightly different run test here to what we normally do in these, which is quite a methodical look through all the key areas. I'm going to touch on everything important, things like GPS and all that, but I do think these are both really excellent watches. Both have been excellent for me during the course of this marathon training. I think they both do a really good job. So what really I'm going to go through is the differences and the observations that came up for me across those different areas and things that stood out as being important to me over the course of marathon training that would affect which one I would buy or use again for a marathon training block. So we might as well start with battery life, because obviously this is a big thing that Garmin offers that you do not get with the Apple Watch Ultra 2. The Apple Watch Ultra 2 does last 2 days quite reliably, and that will include a long run on both days, I found. But if you are going to start listening to music from the watch in those runs, then that will bring the battery life quite a lot. And it is just a much bigger deal, the battery life on the Apple Watch. It's something you have to think about quite a lot. There was one trip away during marathon training where I was going away with my family and a couple of kids. There's lots to think about, and I thought I'm not going to bother to take the Apple Watch because I don't want to have to take another charger and think about that every 2 days. Whereas the Garmin Epix Pro, you are going to get really long battery life. So with the 51mm watch in particular, it goes over a week very reliably. Even when I was running over 120k a week, I would have no problems about charging this watch once a week, and it will often go up towards 10 days with the screen always on, that is. And then if you do want more battery, you can turn the screen to raise to wake, and it's going to extend that to several weeks. That's obviously with the largest Epix Pro 51mm, which does have a big step up in battery on the smaller models, but even with the 47mm watch I'd get 4 or 5 days, and it's just one less thing to think about regularly than the Apple Watch, where you do have to charge it quite a lot. You have to think about that with the sleep tracking as well, and it is an annoyance, and it is a regular annoyance. You can get into a rhythm with it. I'm not saying it's the end of the world having to charge it every 2 days, but it's certainly something that comes up a lot compared to the Garmin. GPS on both watches I think has been really good. I'd say across the course of my testing, my overall impression is that I rely on the Garmin a bit more. I think it's a little bit more accurate for a lot of the kind of runs I do in marathon training. So if I'm doing a session on the road rather than the track, I'll often go do a loop somewhere where I can get a nice flat, decent K or mile long loop where I can run fast without annoying people. And I think the Garmin's GPS in that kind of situation is particularly a little bit better than the Apple's, a bit more reliable for steady pacing and not cutting corners or overdoing loops loops and that kind of thing. It's not a big deal, but I did notice that. And I saw that when I actually did a park run on a looped course. I got a slightly better distance accuracy from the Garmin than the Apple. If you go into city centres, it's a lot closer, and actually it's been a bit hit and miss which one has been better for me. I've done 2 city centre races during this marathon block, including the London Marathon itself. In one, the London Landmarks Half Marathon, the Garmin did outperform the Apple. When I got to a really twisty section amongst high buildings, I was actually surprised how well the Garmin did in that situation. Not perfect, but it was notably better than the Apple Watch. But then in the London Marathon, when I hit Canary Wharf, the worst part of the course for GPS, the Apple Watch Ultra did outperform the Garmin Epix Pro in that section. Although in other parts of the race, I think the Garmin just outdid the Apple. So it's overall very close. I'd say for the most part, I'd probably give it to the Garmin. But if you're someone who runs regularly in big cities, both of them are still going to struggle at various points. I did one race on open roads out in the countryside, and both of them were absolutely excellent, like beeping within seconds of each other and really giving me very good pacing information. So the GPS overall is good, but I just slightly give it to the Garmin, I think, on overall accuracy. When it comes to heart rate, I actually also think the Garmin just edges this with the new Elevate sensor you have on the version of the Epix Pro, which also came out with the Phoenix Pro. Overall, I think it's probably proved just that little bit more reliable. Actually, during the London Marathon, I didn't run with a chest strap at all, and the Garmin Epix Pro was pretty good throughout the race. Gave me what I would say is the correct reading for nearly all of the race, whereas the Apple Watch didn't. It was too high early on and wasn't really something I could rely on. I think actually in the race at times, I looked at the Garmin and it was quite useful to know the heart rate information and believe it to be accurate. But a lot of the testing that I did put on a chest strap, because neither watch is infallible, and testing them during the long British winter when it's harder to get a good read from optical heart rate sensors, neither of them were reliable enough to use, I'd say, to guide sessions or to put info into any kind of training analysis you get on the Garmin in particular. So probably overall it would be a bit of a tie, because with both watch I would pair an external heart rate sensor to get more accurate information in. But when I haven't been doing that during this marathon block, I think the Garmin's been a little bit more reliable. But yeah, I wouldn't trust either without an external strap linked to them, which is obviously easier on the Garmin because you can link via both Bluetooth and ANT+. One big area I did notice a lot of difference between the two watches throughout the testing was training analysis. And I mentioned at the start that occasionally I'd have to take one of these watches off to put another one on, because I was doing a review of that watch, and in that case it would always be the Apple Watch Ultra, because you don't have to wear this all the time. It's actually quite a nice thing in a way. You could frame it as a positive, like you can take this off, put it back on, it doesn't matter. Whereas with the Garmin, there's a lot of data that's building up over time in the background, your overall training load, things like your endurance score and all that, and it does give you quite an interesting wealth of data you can dive into, and that is something that you just don't get at all with the Apple Watch. I'll come on to some of the third-party apps available in a minute, but with Garmin you get things like the training readiness thing, which I do think if you're going to wear it for a long block of training, you can start to get a little bit of info from that is quite useful. It's not based entirely on accurate information, because things like sleep tracking isn't always very good on the watch or something like that, but I do think you can use it as a nice way of spotting trends in your overall kind of tiredness and fatigue over a block of training. And there are some interesting extra stats on the Garmin, like the endurance score I mentioned. I did notice that rising, especially in the early part of my marathon training when I was really ramping up the volume and doing a lot of hard workouts, and then actually it started to come down again towards the end of my marathon block. There's more on here if you want to dive into data about your training, and over the course of a big block like I did when I was doing high mileage weeks, I did like to go in and see all that data presented in colourful graphs via Garmin. Like, it was interesting. It's not something that I would set my stall by or guide my training with that often. I've got a coach and I've got a training plan I'm using, but there was lots of interesting data there. You just don't get any of that on the Apple Watch. The third-party market can fill this in a little bit. Something like Training Today I tested during my marathon block this time, and it uses your heart rate variability readings when you're still and gives you a kind of rating out of 10 of how ready you are. It just seemed quite hit and miss to me, and that's, I think, mostly down to the hardware on the watch, which isn't going to take heart rate variability readings as often as the Garmin watch, especially through the night. And then you do run into the problem of, can you wear the Apple Watch Ultra at night? Because I'd often use that as a time to charge it, so it'll be ready for the next day, and then that again will make it harder for it to get reliable indication of the overall state of your body. So this is certainly an area where the Garmin watch is more accurate and more useful, even down to things like VO2 max. I could see my trend over time of it increasing throughout marathon training. I will say though, the Garmin race predictor is still terrible. It massively underestimates my marathon time, my half marathon time, despite running those times with the watch, and overestimates how fast I am at 5k at any given time. So that's something you're not missing out on with the Apple Watch. So a couple of little things did come up for me when it comes to sports tracking. I think you get more customization of data screens and stats with the Epix Pro, and I think it's easier to set it up exactly how I like it. You've got a lot more of that with Apple since a couple of years ago they updated the software on the watch, and it's certainly fine, but I slightly prefer still the way the grid you get presenting your stats on the Garmin. I think it's a bit easier to read at a glance than the kind of list of stats you get on Apple Watch. A bigger thing is, and this might be quite a Nick thing, I'm very interested to know if other people have noticed this or care about this, but basically I use lap pace or split pace, as Apple calls it, to pace a lot of my runs. I'll often go and do, say, a progression run where I do 5k at a certain pace, 5k at a certain pace, and I'm using the lap pace for each individual kilometre or mile to kind of guide my pacing in that block. And with Garmin it's fine, it all seems fine, it works, it's intuitive, it's right, it gets the pace right and averages it right across the lap. Apple does it weirdly, and it doesn't help me. So at the start of every individual K, the pace is very slow. So say I'm doing 10K at 330 per K pace, I would run the first K, hit 330 on the watch, and then I'd start the next K, and my split pace for that K would be too high, even though I'd basically had kept my pace the same evenly. It would be like 405 per K. And by the end of the K, it's worked its way down to match what I'm getting from the Garmin. But actually using it to pace is very difficult because you're too slow at the start of the kilometers. You start speeding up a bit unnaturally, and you end up surging and stuff like that, which is not how I want to use it to pace that session. So, like I say, this might just be a big bugbear of mine. I don't know if people notice it, but I don't like the way that Apple does split pace, or it might just be wrong. It's not doing it correctly in my mind, and the way Garmin does it makes it a lot easier to pace workouts. That's just something I've noticed regularly every single week, because I do use that metric to pace a lot of workouts and a lot of runs, and it's just easier to do it with Garmin. And it's the same actually with segment pace on the Apple Watch. If you take a manual segment, it starts off the pace very slow and then gradually comes down to the pace you have been running the whole time, I think. So anyway, any insights into that? If anyone else has noticed that, I'd love to know, because it just drives me a little bit mad and I can't work out what's going on. A couple of design things I noticed throughout the time testing the watch. The Apple Watch does feel a bit smaller and lighter on the wrist. It's actually not that big a difference in the size. They are both quite big watches, but the Ultra certainly seems a bit more comfortable to wear, although the button has more of a tendency to catch things no matter which way round I wore it. Sometimes if I bent my arm in a certain way, I was more likely to set off the buttons on the Apple Watch than I was the Garmin. Not a big problem though. The flashlight has been very useful on the Epix Pro, I'll say that, and I think it's different to how most people will use it. So if you are a very adventurous person going out and stuff like that, and you need a general light around camp, or you're outside in the dark a lot, it's a really good light to have. But for my use, it's been used every single night a couple of times to go up and down stairs and basically tend to a crying baby throughout the time during marathon training, and it has been very useful. I will say that it is a good little extra light. It's a nice thing to have on the watch. I wouldn't buy the Epix Pro myself for that use, because I'm just going up and down stairs. But if you are someone who needs an extra light regularly because you're outside in the dark a lot, it's a very nice extra feature you have here compared to the kind of torch setting on the Apple Watch. Activity and sleep tracking is an area that the Apple Watch is a lot better at, especially activity tracking. The way the Apple Watch does that everyday activity tracking is much more engaging, and it seems more accurate than the Garmin as well. The step counts and stuff like that, and the active calories burnt during the day have always been better on the Apple Watch for me. I also found that the calorie counts on the Garmin aren't very useful. I think they set the base amount at 2,000 calories, and then you get active calories on top of that, and I just don't think that's right for me. I don't think my base metabolic rate is 2,000 calories. I don't know, but it just feels like if I went on the calorie counts alone on the Garmin, I would end up under-fueling during marathon blocks. So I actually don't tend to go by calorie counts on watches. I just eat loads and loads of food, but I do think the Apple Watch has been much more accurate on that. And that can be quite important during a long marathon training block. If you are doing high mileage, if you're seeing a big number on your wrist, an accurate big number, there are lots of calories you've burnt, you will hopefully fuel accordingly and make sure you're not losing weight. Whereas I do think the Garmin underplays that slightly in a way that I can't seem to change. I can't seem to change that base setting on the watch. And the Garmin sleep tracking has more detail, and it feeds into interesting stats like training readiness. They do a lot more with the data it's collecting at night, but I don't think the Garmin sleep tracking is always that accurate. I think it has a tendency to record periods where I'm awake, either in the middle of the night or at the start and end of the night, or I'm just lying in bed or watching TV and being quite still. It will record that as light sleep and artificially inflate my overall sleep time as a result. Also, sometimes just missed when I would go up and down stairs to tend to a baby, which you should be spotting really. That's not very good. It will still have that logged as light sleep. So when I did wear the Apple Watch to track my sleep at night, it did give me what I thought was a very accurate picture of my night's rest, just with quite a simple sleep stages graph and the overall time of sleep. The problem with the Apple Watch is obviously if you are wearing it at night, you're not charging it at night, and then you have to think of a time to charge it in the day. It does charge very quickly, but it's just an extra thing to think about. So smart is an area where the Apple Watch certainly still has the edge, as you'd expect from a full-fledged smartwatch. You've got a massive app store there to extend the features on the watch, and simply don't get that from the Garmin Connect IQ app store. There are some useful smarts on the Epix Pro, and the music is done pretty well on Garmin's if you have a Spotify premium account or Deezer or Amazon Music. But again, everything's a bit easier to do on the Apple Watch, and something that has been very noticeable for me during this marathon cycle is every supermarket in the UK, you now have to have a membership card to get the discounts. Like everyone, you only get the reductions in price on certain goods if you have a loyalty card, which is abhorrent and should be banned because it's a data collection exercise. But the Apple Watch makes it very easy to store all those cards on your wrist. So my card, my Tesco card, my Sainsbury's Next card, it's all on the watch, and that has been very useful, like day in, day out, to make sure I'm not missing out on the actual price the food and other things I'm buying should be at those supermarkets, who are Now just data collect. I'm not going to get into this. But basically it's very annoying, and the Apple Watch makes it a lot easier to deal with all those stupid cards you now need. Obviously then there's loads of other smart things about it as well, like plane tickets, train tickets, even just going through the tube with that, very easily contactless payments. It is a better smartwatch for sure. Garmin, I think, still needs to really ramp up the amount of watch faces they have, and actually the amount of straps they have. This is a third-party strap I got off eBay, which is quite nice, but I think Garmin could do a lot more to make nice straps available for itself direct, to increase how customizable the watch feels. Obviously with the Apple Watch Ultra, there's a massive array of Apple straps and third-party straps out there that are all pretty quite nice. Quick word on navigation. I do think this is an area where Garmin just does it really, really well. Everything is done natively. You can create routes on the fly. The maps are really clear. The routes are really clear. It's just a brilliant feature on Garmin's, with extra features like Climb Pro as well, which looks at the climbs and descents in your route. Like, I've gone on a few trips away during this time, and it's always been very easy to load up the Garmin app, make a quick route on there, send it to the watch, and just head out, and then run around a new place without any fears of getting lost. With the Apple Watch, the native stuff doesn't really do this yet. I think it will be something that probably will come in the next couple of years. There are certainly apps, though, to sort this for you. Things like Work Outdoors or Footpath, both very good running apps that have maps, and with Footpath you're getting really good turn-by-turn directions as well. So you can solve it with the watch, and as I mentioned before, like, there's no real reason to stay exclusively with the Apple Workout app when you're using this watch. You can very easily go from a different app every day, because there's no centralization of all that data into one place that offers training analysis with the Apple Watch. So there is that freedom to just use a different app to suit the needs you have on that day. Like URace is a very good racing app where you can manually correct distance, and then you can use Footpath when you do need maps. And that is a nice thing about the Apple Watch, but it is easier just to use the native stuff on the Garmin. Like, again, day in, day out, it's one less thing to think about. It's just very easy to use and just works really well. So yeah, navigation is certainly a big strong suit for Garmin. And then we might as well have a quick chat about the London Marathon. We do have a full race vid up where I talk about the watches as well, but the setup I had for each watch was with the Garmin, I put on the distance and time target so I could see how far ahead I was of my target and get a predicted time I was going to finish. I was aiming for a 2:27 and did indeed run a 2:27, and with the Garmin I was manually splitting every 2k because my goal pace was around 3:30 a k, so 7 minutes for every 2k split. I knew the GPS was going to be dodgy at times, and I just manually split to get peace of mind that I was roughly around there throughout the race. With the Apple Watch I put on the pacer mode and again set up the same time target, and that gives you a little indicator of how far ahead of the time you are. The Apple Watch had an absolutely outstanding day on accuracy. Like, I don't know if the distance was corrected or something because I'd set the distance goal, but the distance came up as 42.2k. It had pretty much the exact time ahead of my goal I was at the end. I ran a 2:27.34 and I'd put 2:27.59 as my thing, and I had 30 odd seconds ahead of time target. So it was really good. Like, both of them went a bit too lally in Canary Wharf, and with the Apple I still had the automatic lap splits coming in. I could tell some were wrong, some were right, but then by the end of the race it really felt like I was getting that buzz on my watch as I was passing the markers. It was really very good for pacing, and I could look down, and I wasn't using split pace during the race because of my previous concerns I talked about. I was basically just using that time ahead or behind and the automatic laps, and the Apple Watch was very good. Garmin was pretty good as well. The overall distance is a bit long, but you expect that with a marathon. I was using the lap pace on the Garmin within those 2k splits to roughly make sure I was running around 3:30 per k pace, and I could tell it was being a little bit generous in the pace each time, and you could just adjust by a second or so, but definitely could use the Garmin to pace my race, which is what I did, especially in the first half when I was trying to make sure I didn't go out too quick. Obviously in the second half of the race you just kind of, all bets are off, you're just running as hard as you can, but the Garmin I think was very useful on the day as well. So both of them were quite impressive in the London Marathon. Like I said earlier, the heart rate on the Garmin was actually very good. The GPS looked slightly better, the trace on the Garmin when it came to Canary Wharf, but the Apple certainly was very accurate as well, and the pacer mode on it was probably more useful than the equivalent pacer mode on the Garmin because of the overall distance being very accurate at the end. A lot of information there. I checked a lot of information there. I just basically want to throw out loads of things that I had noticed, and maybe some of them will resonate with you more than others, and that will really help you make a decision if you are picking between these watches. Like, if there's some things there that I thought were little annoyances that were very big annoyances for you, that might mean you would very much be swayed to one watch or the other. Some of the biggest things obviously are things like battery life on the Apple Watch not being very good, but the smartwatch features on the watch being very good. They are both very good within an activity in terms of the tracking you get, in terms of the overall accuracy and that kind of thing. Then with Garmin you get a whole lot more stuff after the activity, like the training analysis, and you get better navigation tools on here, even though you can cover those quite well with third-party apps on the Apple Watch. My overall decision, the watch I would stick with after all that time training would be the Garmin. A lot of it comes down to that pacing thing I was talking about, but in general it's just the more easy to use sports watch. As someone who is quite busy now with family and that kind of thing, the battery life is also a really big factor for me, just being able to put it on my wrist, leave it there and not have to worry about charging it for a week or so. I also think it's a really attractive watch nowadays, the Garmin. I do like the way it looks. I like the watch face, even though there could be more of them. I like the band. The Apple Watch Ultra is a better looking watch, I think, but I don't know, it's not that good looking a watch. Like the original, the actual series watch, I think is the best looking Apple Watch, but it doesn't have dual band GPS or anything like that, and doesn't have the lap button. So overall, I would stick to the Garmin myself. I think it is a fantastic watch, the Epix Pro, but you are going to have to pay a whole load more for it. So you've got to really value, I think, some of the extra features you get on it to make it worth the outlay over the Apple Watch Ultra, which is a very good day-to-day sports watch for sure, and a very accurate one all round as well. Okie dokie, that was a lot of talking about these two watches. Hopefully some of you found it quite useful. Please do like and subscribe, ring the little bell, and we'll see you next time.